of Wales and also for northern areas of Scotland. The winds will be lighter tomorrow. Temperatures, as they have been over the past few days, typically around 8 or 9 Celsius.
Hello, good evening to you. This is BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Our headlines at 5 o'clock. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock disputes claims that he rejected COVID testing advice during the pandemic after WhatsApp messages leaked to a newspaper suggest he was told there should be testing of all residents going into English care homes. The parents of 16-year-old Kaylee Titford, who died after what was described as shocking and prolonged neglect at the family home in mid-Wales, have been jailed.
I find it impossible to say that one parent was more to blame than the other. They were both equally responsible and they were both equally culpable.
The Greek Transport Minister resigns and a station master in charge of signalling has been arrested after at least 36 people died and dozens were injured following a train crash in northern Greece. As the search continues, police fear that the missing 2-month-old baby has come to serious harm. The parents, Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. New data shows hundreds of sex offenders slipped off the police radar simply by changing their names. Good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. The former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's been accused of rejecting key advice on care homes during the pandemic. The Daily Telegraph newspaper says it's obtained thousands of WhatsApp messages that Mr Hancock sent and received at the height of the COVID crisis. The paper says they show Mr Hancock decided against advice to test all residents. Mr Hancock's spokesperson has called that a distorted account. Is our political correspondent Ben Wright.
In April 2020, COVID was spreading fast. The country was in lockdown. Politicians and officials were scrambling to respond. At the heart of decision-making was the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock.
I am now setting the goal of 100,000 tests per day by the end of this month.
Last year, Mr Hancock released his version of events in a book, co-written by the journalist Isabel Oakeshott. She has now given the Telegraph more than 100,000 WhatsApp messages from Mr Hancock to other politicians and officials. He is furious at the leak, but they give a partial glimpse into what was going on at the time. The issue of care home testing was discussed in WhatsApp messages from April the 14th, 2020. In one message to an aide, Mr Hancock said that England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, said he was recommending testing for all going into care homes. The Telegraph says that by the end of that day, Mr Hancock appeared to have changed his mind, publishing a message saying, "Isolate all going into care from hospital. I do not think the community commitment adds anything and it muddies the waters." Today, a spokesman for Mr Hancock insisted it wasn't possible to test everyone entering care homes at the time. The spokesman said, "These stolen messages have been doctored to create a false story that Matt rejected clinical advice on care home testing. That is flat wrong." A view echoed by a former health minister this morning.
He changed his view because there was an operational meeting to talk about how you were actually going to test people and how many actual tests we had. The reality was there was a very, very limited number of those tests.
In the Commons, there was agreement that only the COVID public inquiry could establish what really happened.
The country deserves better. The COVID inquiry has already cost the taxpayer £85 million and hasn't heard from a single government minister yet. So can the Prime Minister assure the House no more delays, that the inquiry will have whatever support it needs to report by the end of this year.
Minister. Rather than comment on piecemeal bits of information, I'm sure the honourable gentleman would agree with me the right way for these things to be looked at is the COVID inquiry. That's why we've established the COVID inquiry. And he will know, as he has mentioned it one or two times before that he was a lawyer in a previous life, that there is a proper process to these things. It is an independent inquiry. It has the resources it needs. It has the powers it needs. And what we should all do in this House is let them get on and do their job.
For the families of COVID's victims, thousands of whom died in care homes, it's the public inquiry that promises to provide a full picture of what the government got right and wrong. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Let's get more on this then with our political correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart. And David, Matt Hancock is a hugely controversial figure. And he strongly denies these claims, doesn't he? Assess for us the significance of what's been said in the Daily Telegraph today.
Well, that's right. The Telegraph has obtained over 100,000 messages sent and received by Matt Hancock during the pandemic. And they've been given to the Telegraph by the journalist Isabel Oakeshott, who wrote a book, memoirs, with Matt Hancock quite recently. She's been very critical of how the government handled COVID, very critical of lockdowns, and believes that she had a duty to go public with the messages she'd got her hands on when she was writing the book. But what Matt Hancock essentially is saying, in the words of his spokesman, is that this has been distorted, that the picture being painted here is of him deciding not to provide tests to people who were going into care homes from the community, just those going into hospital, without giving the full context here that that was a decision made off the back of operational meetings when he was told there simply wasn't the capacity, there wasn't enough testing there at the time in order to do that, and therefore he believes the most sensible conclusion to draw was to test those going from hospital into care homes. It did come up at Prime Minister's questions briefly this afternoon, as Ben's report showed. It did come up in a bit more detail in an urgent question in the Commons later on, and it was the Care Minister, Helen Whatley, who was responding to that. She was in the same job during the pandemic, working with Matt Hancock, and she went into a bit more detail about what government policy was at this time. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
But for instance, there is an email following exactly this exchange that she's referring to that says we can press ahead straight away with hospitals testing patients who are going to care homes, and we should aspire to, as soon as capacity allows, and when we've worked out an operational way of delivering this, that everyone going into a care home from the community could be tested. So as I say to her, there's very selective information that she is basing her comments on.
So Helen Whatley really stressing there, similar to what Matt Hancock's spokesperson has been saying, essentially that the government's decisions were based on testing capacity, and that the aim was always, once possible, to test anyone going into a care home, and they feel that the Telegraph story is not painting this full picture. What happens next? Well, the COVID public inquiry is taking place. There's a lot of frustration about how long that's taking to happen. It looks like we're not probably talking about months. We could be talking about beyond the next election before we hear back from that. In the more immediate future, we know the Telegraph has obtained over 100,000 messages sent and received by Matt Hancock. It's highly anticipated there will be more stories that the newspaper will publish, so I imagine a lot of eyes on what the Telegraph put on their front page this evening into tomorrow.
David, thank you very much indeed. And we can talk more about this actually now with Mike Padgham, who's chair of the Independent Care Group. Thank you very much for being with us. I mean, you know a lot about care homes. What do you think of these allegations that the former Health Secretary didn't take this advice to test everybody going into care homes at the start of the pandemic?
Good afternoon, Ben. Well, yes, it does appear to show that my feeling is that residents in care homes were let down again. Because at the very beginning, we were told not to worry, it wasn't going to affect care homes at all. Then we had the issue of the guidance kept changing. Then we were told only testing when residents come from hospital or when patients come from hospital. But we knew, we could see what was happening in Europe, because we felt there was a big gap why people coming from the community shouldn't be tested as well. And we felt we were second place in the NHS, basically. The tests were going to the NHS rather than into care homes.
I mean, allies of Matt Hancock have said, actually, you know, the Telegraph have got this wrong. It was because of a lack of testing capacity. That's why it was not possible to check everybody going into a care home at that time.
Yes, and I don't know why there wasn't sufficient testing capacity in those early days. Of course, it was a long time, several months later, before the capacity was there to test people coming from the community. But as Matt Hancock told the Select Committee a little while later, in fact, that was the strongest route of transmission from the community. I would just say that the public inquiry is a good thing, which is looking into this, needs to report much quicker if it could, because I think we need to learn some lessons from this. And if things did go wrong, we need to learn them earlier so we can put things right for the future. It seems to me a bit rich that it's going to take several more years before all this comes out and we can investigate it properly. All I can say is I don't think there was a protective ring around care homes at that time. And the sector, of course, is still on its knees now and is weak for the future.
Well, what do you think was the cost then of not having a protective ring, as you put it, around those care homes?
Well, sadly, many people lost their lives that shouldn't have lost their lives, in my view. The social care sector was very weak before the pandemic came along. We weren't well placed. We didn't have the PPE, we didn't have the tests, and we had difficulty staffing, and we still got difficulty staffing today. So there's a lot the government could do to try and put this right in the future.
The Prime Minister was saying today, you know, people should not focus on what he called piecemeal bits of information. In other words, these WhatsApp messages that we saw in the paper today. Do you go along with that? Or because, as you say, the inquiry could be some way off, would you rather have sort of bits and pieces coming out as they have done today in the Daily Telegraph?
Well, I'd like to see the facts made public, yes, but I do think the inquiry, I'm not an expert how long it takes to actually get a public inquiry through from start to finish, but we ought to be able to do this much quicker, because the key thing is we have to learn lessons and we don't want to wait years, because if another pandemic comes along, we need to make sure we don't have a disaster like we did this time. And I think the government in office should be held to account sooner rather than later, because when the public inquiry does report, many of the people responsible, I don't think, will be in government.
Mike Padgham, thank you very much indeed, Chair of the Independent Care Group. Thank you. The parents of a disabled teenager who died after prolonged neglect at the family home in Wales have both been jailed. Kaylee Tipford was 16 years old and weighed 22 stone when she died in October 2020. The father, who was found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter, was sentenced to 7.5 years. The teenager's mother, Sarah Lloyd-Jones, who admitted the same charge, was jailed for 6 years. Well, during the sentencing at Swansea Crown Court, the judge, Mr Justice Griffiths, said they were both equally to blame.
His neglect was total, and he could and should have done more to help and ask others for help. Instead, when he was not at work, he sat in his bedroom upstairs watching television. Equally, I do not accept that Sarah Lloyd-Jones can throw the blame onto her husband. It was too much for her to do on her own. That I do accept. But it was her duty to ask for help and to accept it from the agencies which over the years she sometimes ignored or turned away. When she had a telephone appointment with Birmingham Children's Hospital in May 2020, she did not say that help was needed for Kaylee. She was positively offered help in August 2020 by contact from a young person's lymphedema specialist, and later contact from a young people's specialist, and later contact from the Youth Intervention Service. She did not take up any of these offers. When Kaylee's non-attendance at school was queried after schools reopened in September 2020, she made various excuses for not sending Kaylee back without disclosing what was really happening. I find it impossible to say that one parent was more to blame than the other. They were both equally responsible, and they were both equally culpable.
Well, that was the judge sentencing there, Mr Justice Griffiths. Let's go to our correspondent, Hal Griffith, who's at Swansea Crown Court for us now. And how the details of this case so horrific. But in a sense, and we were talking at the beginning of the programme about COVID and the height of the pandemic, that was why, in a way, her plight was hidden from the world because of the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. And up until the first national lockdown in March 2020, well, Kayleigh had obvious weight problems. She'd outgrown her wheelchair. She did still have an active life. She was still attending a mainstream school, and the evidence during the trial suggested that she was still fiercely independent. So things declined very, very quickly during lockdown. It became very clear that her parents not just couldn't cope, but didn't try to cope, and vitally, as you heard from the judge there, didn't look for help when it was available. Now, as you suggested, some of the details of this case are very distressing. The conditions in which she was found after 6 months immobile in bed, not even able to get up to use the toilet or to shower. There were soiled sheets, there were flies and maggots, and one piece of evidence we heard referenced by the judge today, that she was so distressed by this herself, she sent a message to her mother complaining about the flies landing on her, to which her mother's response was, well, they must like you. It's clear that neither parent cared enough to look for help for Kayleigh, and sadly in the end her body couldn't cope.
And both the parents jailed, as we've seen. What about the authorities, though? Are there questions for them about whether they could have done more?
Absolutely, as is standard in any case like this. Here in Wales, they call child practice reviews, an opportunity to look at whether the authorities, whether they be the school, the NHS, the local social services, could or should have done more. Now, she wasn't at that stage registered as a child at risk. She had previously, but the suggestion was that right up until the time of lockdown, apart from her weight problems, things had been going okay for Kayleigh. She'd attended a mainstream school. Earlier on, she'd been quite active in terms of wheelchair basketball, but clearly things did go wrong very quickly. The judge suggested there had been opportunities for the family to get her help right up until August 2022, even into early September, so just a month or so before her death. But this review will need to look very carefully at the question of whether the authorities should have intervened, even if there wasn't a cry for help from the parents. Could the authorities have done more? There's no date yet for the publication of that report.
Al Griffith, thank you very much indeed. At least 36 people have been killed and dozens injured after 2 trains collided head-on in Greece. The country's president has called it an unimaginable tragedy. One train was a passenger service running from Athens to Thessaloniki with 350 people on board. It crashed head-on at high speed with a freight train on the same stretch of track near the Tempe district north of the city of Larissa. Well, police have arrested a station master who was in charge of signalling, and the Greek Transport Minister Kostas Karamanlis has now resigned. Our Europe correspondent Jessica Parker has this report.
Within seconds, 2 trains rumbling through the night came to this. A head-on crash between a freight and passenger service carrying around 350 people.
It was chaos. Tumbling over, fires, cables hanging, broken windows, people screaming, people trapped.
You can see the shock, the fear on the faces, some stained with blood, of those who escaped.
We were sitting in the second carriage from the front of the train. But in the front, it was very difficult for anybody to survive because the collision happened head-on. At some point, we heard an announcement about a delay from the driver because there was confusion with the railway tracks. A minute later, boom.
As day breaks, the force of the impact becomes clear. Carriages destroyed, burnt out or thrown off the track. Many on board, it's reported, were young people heading back to Thessaloniki after a Greek Orthodox holiday. What's left now is a mess of metal and shattered glass, seats strewn on the ground. Everywhere, evidence of the force of this collision.
Our thoughts are with the victims' relatives. Our duty is to treat the injured and then to identify the bodies. I can guarantee only one thing. We will find out what caused this tragedy and will do whatever we can to avoid anything similar in the future.
Efforts to find people who may still be alive stretched on for hours. The cause of all this isn't yet clear, but an investigation's been launched as authorities say the two services were running on the same track, leading to what's being described as Greece's worst train crash in living memory. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
The director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, has said it believes that COVID-19 probably originated in a government-controlled laboratory in China. China's denied a lab leak in Wuhan and says the allegation is defamatory. Mr. Wray's comments come a day after the US ambassador to China called for the country to be more honest about the origins of COVID. The Nigerian Electoral Commission has declared the governing party candidate Bola Tinubu the winner of Saturday's disputed presidential election. The 70-year-old veteran politician won with almost 9 million votes, well ahead of his main rival, who got nearly 7 million. The two main opposition parties have demanded a rerun of the election. In his acceptance speech, Mr. Tinubu called for reconciliation with his opponents. Police in Brighton say their search for a missing baby is continuing, and they've asked the courts for permission to question the parents for longer. More than 200 police officers using dogs, thermal imaging cameras and drones are still looking for the missing 2-month-old baby in Sussex amid growing fears that the child may have come to harm. The parents, Constance Martin and her partner Mark Gordon, a convicted sex offender, were arrested in Brighton yesterday on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Aruna Iyengar reports.
It's a difficult and painstaking search covering 90 square miles to find a baby aged just 2 months old. Over 200 police officers are searching allotments and open ground. Helicopters, sniffer dogs, thermal imaging cameras and drones are all being deployed. Police say support from the public so far has been vital.
The last known sighting of Constance and Mark was in Newhaven on the 8th of January. And I'm therefore reiterating to the appeal to members of the public between Brighton and Newhaven to report any potential sightings or information.
A bit like a needle in a haystack, I think. But let's hope they do find something and solve the crisis.
I don't know if the baby's there or not, but I think everybody's hoping they will find it.
Constance Martin and her partner Mark Gordon, a convicted rapist, have been missing for 53 days. Police believe the baby was born in the back of a car in early January. While shopping in this store in Brighton on Monday, they were spotted by members of the public who called the police. Soon after this CCTV was taken in North Brighton, the couple were arrested. They were walking towards an allotment and golf course. The couple have used large amounts of cash to live off-grid since early January. On January the 5th, their car was found on fire on the side of the M61 near Bolton. From there, the couple took a taxi to Liverpool, then another to Harwich, arriving there on the morning of the 6th of January. By lunchtime on the 7th, they were in East London, where they bought a blue tent from Argos and abandoned their pushchair. There were more taxi journeys, including a final one to the port of Newhaven. It's during one of these journeys that a taxi driver reported hearing the sound of a baby. 35-year-old Constance Martin comes from a wealthy family. She grew up in this country estate in Dorset and was at drama school in 2016 when she first met 48-year-old Mark Gordon. Gordon was deported to Britain from the United States in 2010 after spending 20 years in prison for a rape he committed aged 14. Meanwhile, the police say they're now having to consider that the infant has come to some serious harm after possibly many days out in the cold. Aruna Iyengar, BBC News.
So let's get more on this with our reporter, Frankie McCamlin, who's in Brighton for us. And Frankie, we've seen that search. I mean, an enormous search, 200 officers. You're there. What is the latest on that search?
Well, good evening, Ben. Where I am at the moment is just a few metres, actually, from where the couple were arrested. They're on this road, Golf Drive, walking up towards what's been described as a big open space where there are a number of allotments, and it's where the police search started on Monday night. We understand that search of those allotments is clear. We've seen those sniffer dogs, thermal cameras, helicopters, you name it. The police have thrown every resource at this that they can, and it's not just Sussex police here, it's also the Metropolitan Brighton Police too. Now, we did have a statement a few hours ago from both forces together who said that there wasn't really much of an update, and they're getting more and more concerned. And you can probably tell we are starting to lose the light again here, and temperatures, I can tell you, are dropping. So concern increasing. Now, what the police did say is they've applied to keep the couple who are in custody for an extra 36 hours. We understand they're not talking with the police, not giving any information away at the moment. The police did repeat the statement, a very concerning statement, that they must consider that this baby has come to serious harm. They're also calling on the public. Now, they say the couple was spotted in Newhaven, they were also spotted in Brighton. They're calling on the public between those areas and in those both of those towns to stay vigilant, to look out, to see if they can see anything that looks suspicious, and to give them a call. But like I say here, Ben, we're starting to lose the light again. This is we're going into the third night of this investigation, and the third night this baby has been without his parents.
OK, Frankie, thank you very much indeed. Frankie McCamley reporting there. A legal bid to protect tenants from so-called ghost landlords has failed in a move that could have significant implications for people looking to claim their rent back if they live in bad conditions. Let's talk to our reporter Jim Connolly, who's been following the story. Now, what did the Supreme Court rule? What have we heard?
Well, unanimously, all 5 judges ruled that someone's landlord is the person that they sign their contract with. It can't be the person at the top of the chain, so the owner of the property. And this has significant implications, as you're just saying, for people trying to claim back their rent, because obviously it now means that we know who that person is.
So now this is all related to something that is called rent to rent, which sounds a bit confusing. What is that exactly?
Well, rent to rent is where, say, a landlord has a property and someone comes along, a rent to rent company, and guarantees to that person a fixed income for a number of years. They then come along, split the place up into multiple rooms, break it down, and turn a profit by renting it out on a room-by-room basis. That in itself is completely legal. There is nothing wrong with that process at all. However, campaigners say it can be exploited by criminal landlords and criminal rent-to-rent companies as a way of basically diffusing the situation and allowing them to be untrackable, because these rent-to-rent companies often have very limited liabilities, so they can simply fold, disappear, leaving people with nowhere to turn. And a few weeks ago, I met Jess, who tried to track down her landlord, and she said it was impossible.
It was in like a general state of disrepair. Shared bathroom was giving off electric shocks, and we didn't have a fire door either. It did end up being quite unpleasant.
So you can see it flowing out. So that's the water.
Any works that needed doing, it's all through text, so there's no peace of mind. You don't know who you're going to. It felt like we were chasing a ghost.
And what did her landlord in that case say?
Well, Jess took her landlord to a tribunal, and the owner of the property told us she doesn't manage the flat where Jess lived and is appealing the basis of the tribunal's findings. The person who Jess dealt with as her landlord didn't respond to our request for a comment. But Jess's case really just highlights how hard it can be for people at times to track down their landlord, and housing campaigners worry that today's ruling could make it even more difficult, and they're calling on the government to sort of tighten up the rules. There's an upcoming renters reform bill going through Parliament as we speak, and they're saying that's the place that tenants need protection building in.
And so we've had that ruling. What has been the response from landlords and their organisations?
Well, the National Residential Landlords Association, they've welcomed this. They say it gives clarity for its members. Ben Beadle, its chief executive, said the ruling makes it clear that the responsibility of rent-to-rent companies acting as a landlord to ensure that relevant legal requirements are met, since it is them that receives the tenant's money. It's simply not right, they say, for such companies to take money from people without taking any responsibility for the properties that they're running.
Jim, thank you so much for that. Jim Connolly reporting there. Thank you. Now it's time to take a look at the latest weather forecast for you. It's pretty chilly. Darren Bett's got the forecast.
Hello again. It's been a cloudy and chilly St David's Day for most of us. Still got quite a scattering of showers around at the moment as well. And these are the temperatures as we head towards the end of the day. Now, overnight, there is some drier, clearer skies coming in from continental Europe as we get more of an easterly breeze and clearer Skies are likely across East Anglia, the south east, perhaps the Midlands. Cloud in other areas, still producing a few showers here and there, although we should see clearer skies coming into northern Scotland, so frost is likely here. And across East Anglia and the south east, temperatures won't be far away from freezing by Thursday morning, but there'll be some early sunshine. Still a few light showers left for tomorrow, mainly across south east Scotland, north east England, perhaps 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland. The cloud may increase through the day across the Midlands and across East Anglia. Some sunshine there for southern England, parts of Wales, and also for northern areas of Scotland. The winds will be lighter tomorrow. Temperatures, as they have been over the past few days, typically around 8 or 9 Celsius.
Hello again, you are watching BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Look at our latest news headlines. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has been disputing claims that he rejected COVID testing advice during the pandemic after WhatsApp messages leaked to the Daily Telegraph suggested he was told there should be testing of all residents going into English care homes. The parents of 16-year-old Kaylee Tipford, who died after what was described as shocking and prolonged neglect at the family home in Wales, have both been jailed.
I find it impossible to say that one parent was more to blame than the other. They were both equally responsible, and they were both equally culpable.
The Greek Transport Minister has resigned and a station master has been in charge of signalling has been arrested after at least 36 people died and dozens were injured following a train crash in northern Greece. Police have described the continuing search for a missing 2-month-old baby in Sussex as hugely difficult and painstaking. The parents have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. New data shows more than 700 sex offenders slipped off the police radar in a 3-year period, most of them by changing their names. OK, let's get all the latest sports news for you. Cass has got that for us at the BBC Sports Centre.
Thank you, Ben. Good evening. Former cricketer Azim Rafiq has been speaking today in central London at a disciplinary hearing 2.5 years after he first made claims of racism at Yorkshire, later calling English cricket institutionally racist. Today, evidence was given surrounding members of staff allegedly using racist slurs. Matt Graveling has more.
It's been a damning day for English cricket as the Sports Disciplinary Commission has heard details of a number of alleged incidents of racist abuse aimed at the former Yorkshire spinner Azim Rafiq. The panel heard evidence from 4 of the 7 men charged with bringing the game into disrepute, including the former player Gary Ballance, who admitted to his charge and also admitting to asking Rafiq if his dad owned a corner shop. Former England bowler Matthew Hoggard denies creating a racist nickname for Rafiq in 2008. And another former England bowler, Tim Bresnan, is accused of referring to Asian players as brothers, spin twins and new lot. He denies any racist intentions. And finally today, the panel heard how the former player John Blaine denies using racial slurs in 2010 and 2011. It's important to note that all this evidence was heard in the absence of the 4 men. 6 of the 7 men charged have withdrawn from the disciplinary proceedings, saying that they don't trust the process. But one man who has been charged and is expected to give evidence here tomorrow is the former England captain Michael Vaughan. He categorically denies any allegations of racism.
England's cricketers, meanwhile, have beaten Bangladesh by 3 wickets in the first of their 3-match ODI series. David Malan scoring a brilliant century on the way to helping England reach their target with 2 overs to spare. Joe Linsky reports.
England's cricketing schedule moves round the world at speed. 24 hours on from a test match in New Zealand, now 11 different players put the one-day game in focus.
There it is.
In Bangladesh, Mark Wood is back and this England side are building. In 7 months' time, there's a World Cup in India where Adil Rashid will bowl in conditions just like this. Like Wood, Jofra Archer's back from injury and helped keep Bangladesh to 209 all out. Well in range on paper, less so on this pitch. When the turn did for Phil Salt, Bangladesh sensed a victim. They've not lost a home series since 2016.
Taken.
And now had Jos Buttler out for 9. In fact, no English batter got past 30, except one. David Milan picked his moments and ticked slowly towards a century.
And it is a boundary and it is 100.
A remarkable score that tamed a turning pitch with patience. 7,000 miles from that dramatic test conclusion, England have a one-day winning start. Joe Linsky, BBC News.
Former Formula One test driver Susie Wolff has been appointed Managing Director of the F1 Academy, an all-female series aimed at helping women drivers progress through motorsport. It will consist of 5 teams across 3 races. 19-year-old British driver Abby Pulling, who's raced in Formula 4 and the W Series, will be one of the drivers competing in it.
I'm really excited, having someone like Susie Wolff as the Managing Director. She's got a vast, amount of experience in Formula 1 and Formula E. So, having her involved in, a championship that I'm a part of and, the F1 Academy, helping the younger females driving the talent forward, it's quite an exciting time.
Now, some sad news from the world of football. Former France player Just Fontaine has died at the age of 89. Fontaine is best remembered for scoring 13 goals at the 1958 World Cup, the most by a player at one tournament, to help France reach the semi-finals in Sweden. Fontaine scored 30 goals in just 21 games for Les Bleus between 1953 and 1960. And just before we go, plenty of football to come tonight. 2 huge games in the Premier League, as well as the FA Cup as well. Sheffield United against Spurs will be on BBC One from 7:30. You can keep up to date on the BBC Sports website. That's all the sport for now. Thanks, Hassa. See you later. Cheers. YouTube's been accused of collecting the viewing data of children under the age of 13 in a breach of UK data privacy code designed to protect them. An official complaint has been lodged with the Information Commissioner's Office. YouTube says it has already bolstered children's privacy on the platform. Our technology editor Zoe Kleiman reports.
What are our children watching online and who knows about it? 89% of 3 to 17-year-olds watch YouTube, according to the regulator Ofcom, despite it being aimed at children aged 13 and above.
YouTube gathers data about what its users are watching so that it can show them more videos they might like. It also looks at where they're watching and what they're watching on. Children aren't supposed to be part of this, but lots of them use their parents' devices and accounts, and that means that their data gets gathered too.
Let me see your recommendations.
Campaigner and father of 3, Duncan McCann, says he believes YouTube is breaching industry standards by doing this, as neither the children nor their parents have consented to it, and he's taken his complaint to the Information Commissioner's Office. It has a children's internet code designed to protect children's data privacy.
My preferred reform that YouTube should make is that actually when you enter YouTube, they don't collect any unnecessary and process any unnecessary information, and that the best way to ensure that they are only collecting the data of adults who are properly consenting would be to then have a process where adults can sign in to the tracking, recommendation systems, profiling, targeted ads.
In a statement, YouTube said it had made investments to protect kids and families, including more protective default settings, a dedicated kids app and a supervised experience which requires parental consent. The Information Commissioner's Office told the BBC will consider this complaint carefully. Many tech firms make a lot of money from compiling data about their users and then using it to sell them ads. But children are supposed to be protected from this. Action in the US led to YouTube paying a £140 billion fine and changing its practices.
So it assumed that anyone watching children's content would be potentially under the age of 13, and so collects far less data on that type of content and also doesn't send personalised ads to people watching that content.
It shows that big tech can make big changes when it needs to. Zoe Kleiman, BBC News.
A record number of people have volunteered to help in the training of guide dogs after the BBC highlighted a national shortage of them. The charity, Guide Dogs, says more than 4,500 people have put themselves forward. Our correspondent Sean Dilley has been without a guide dog ever since his last one, Sammy, retired 6 months ago. Well, he is now facing a 2-year wait for a replacement dog, but with more volunteers to train guide dogs, that waiting time could be reduced, as Sean now tells us.
I can only see light if I look directly into the sun or into a light bulb. I couldn't imagine my life without Rio.
She's so important. She's my best friend, my constant companion, my means of independence. Go forward, Ria.
This is the freedom guide dogs give their blind and visually impaired partners. Ella started to lose her sight at 4 years old. When she was 15, she received some bad news.
I think because it happened gradually, it wasn't like an immediate shock of you're not going to see again. I was told I had a retinal detachment and I definitely broke down then. I was with my dad. I can remember him hugging me and the nurses kind of bringing me a cup of water, just kind of comforting me, and then I got booked in for surgery the next day.
Doctors operated to try to save any sight they could, but those attempts failed. Never, says Ella, would she ever want to be without a dog again. Ella and Rio are one of 3,695 partnerships currently working in the UK. That's down from around 5,000 before the pandemic. More than 1 in 5 people who had a guide dog before then now do not.
Come on in, Sam. Let's go. Head. Good boy.
After more than 8 years of working with Sean, guide dog Sammy is set to retire. And Sean may have to wait 2 years for his next dog.
That was 6 months ago. Much of my confidence and mobility left me too that day.
You are actually quite moved today, aren't you? You know, I know...
Sharing my story is by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. The impact, though, has been huge.
The bond you two have...
The Niblock family were one of many watching that day.
It was heartbreaking to watch it, really. It just made us think, why not sign up when we've got the time, the space and everything, just to help make a difference?
They're among more than 4,500 people who have applied to volunteer since Sammy's last walk.
Thank you so much to everyone who's already applied to volunteer at Guide Dogs. Since the coverage, we've seen a peak in applications. So in January alone, we received almost 3,000 volunteer applications.
The charity's new volunteers will go on to help people like me and Ella.
She gives me that independence that I do kind of need and I crave, that I need to live the life I want to lead.
Sean Dilley, BBC News.
Well, a little earlier on today, Rebecca Jones, my colleague, was joined here in the studio by Hayley Andrews, who's head of puppy raising at Guide Dogs, and trainee guide dog Oki.
Oki is a 12-month-old German Shepherd Cross Golden Retriever, and he's being puppy raised at the moment by a lady called Josephine, who's wonderful, and she's currently puppy raising 2 of our dogs. She's got Fable at home as well.
Right, I wonder if you're watching, hello. So you've got more volunteers as a result of Sean's report. How surprised are you?
Oh, it's been amazing. Sean's story has really helped us. We've recruited over 4,600 applications have come through since Sean's first part of his story. But we do need, as Oki's say, lots more volunteers to come through. So we're looking at recruiting over 5,000 more volunteers in our dog supporting roles.
What are people telling you about why they've come forward to volunteer?
People, many different reasons. So obviously as a volunteer fosterer or as a volunteer puppy raiser, we can support you with, he's off.
He's off for an explore, isn't he?
We support you with really dedicated training.
Yeah.
So people that don't have the ability to have a dog at home Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 because of work and because of jobs.
You like the paper, don't you?
Come on, Oki, good
You like the paper.
They can drop them at one of our training schools as a fosterer, so they're going into training and they're having that ability to have a dog at home in the evenings and weekends and that flexibility. But they're also, the main reason is being able to support people like Sean. So being able to provide that life-changing service to someone and bring that, the dogs, the very much needed guide dogs, into their lives.
And what does it involve if you do volunteer to look after a dog?
So with volunteer fostering, to raise a guide dog. So with our volunteer fostering roles, we have sort of many centres across the country. So it's about being able to drop the dogs into the office between 9 and 5 Monday to Friday, and then be that family and that support. So to complete some training at home, and to be able to take the dogs out for their sort of off-lead running, and you know, our dogs have a lot of fun outside of their work, which they enjoy. But yeah, it's about having them in the family as you would getting them used to everyday situations as well.
How different though is it from having a normal dog, an ordinary dog? I mean, are there things you can and can't do with a guide dog? So, for example, I mean, if you're watching telly, can the guide dog come and sit on the sofa with you?
No, we discourage the guide dogs from doing that, mainly because actually, you know, these dogs go to individual people that have individual situations in their homes, and if the dog's used to being able to do things like that, and then you go into a guide dog owner's home where they don't want the dogs on the sofa and the beds, it's a big adjustment for the dogs because you're changing the rules. So actually, okay, good boy. It's about the dogs being able to be part of your family. You know, they get a lot of normal pet dog stuff. They're allowed to, you know, sniff and run and interact with other dogs and children. But actually, we need them to sort of focus on their work when they're in harness and with certain equipment.
Hayley Andrews and Oki there, here in the studio a little earlier on with Rebecca. Now, our latest headlines on BBC News. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is disputing claims that he rejected advice on COVID testing during the pandemic. That's after WhatsApp messages leaked to a newspaper suggested he was told there should be testing of all residents entering English care homes. The parents of 16-year-old Kaylee Titford, who died after what have been described as shocking and prolonged neglect at the family home in Wales, have both been jailed. Police have described the continuing search for a missing 2-month-old baby as hugely difficult and painstaking. The parents have both been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Hundreds of sex offenders have slipped off the police radar, according to data obtained by the BBC. Police lost track of 729 sex offenders over a 3-year period between 2019 and 21. Many simply changed their name after they were convicted in order to avoid detection. And campaigners now want tougher controls to stop that happening, as Phil Mackey reports.
These are just a few of the men who've been jailed for sex offences who later changed their names and went on to reoffend. We know of dozens of others, and it's feared there could be many more out there. Freedom of information requests have revealed the police no longer know the whereabouts of at least 729 sex offenders. Campaigners believe most have changed their names to make it easier to disappear. Della Wright was abused as a child. Decades later, when she reported the case to the police, she learned that the man responsible had changed his identity and reoffended. She's leading a campaign for what they're calling Della's Law, to deny sex offenders the right to change their names.
It should be that that offence follows you for the rest of your life, so that when you want to start a new job, when you want to get into a new relationship, those people around you are aware of who you are and what you've done. If it's as simple as a sex offender saying, no, I've never been known by any other name, and nobody checks that, it's far too simplistic.
The National Police Chiefs Council described the current system as robust, and it said that in the UK we have world-leading powers to deal with sex offenders. The Home Office added that recently the laws had got even tougher, and that if anybody failed to register a change of name, they could go to prison for up to 5 years. The Lucy Faithfull Foundation has worked successfully with sex offenders for decades, helping to stop them committing more crimes.
If changing a name assists in doing that, then that for me becomes a priority. But of course they have to do that in a way that is consistent with their registration requirements, that doesn't allow them to seek opportunities and take opportunities to reoffend.
As a teenager, Lauren Eden was abused by her biological father. He's now out of prison and has changed his name. Even though he's told the authorities, she doesn't think he should have been allowed to.
To be able to come out and live in a new place with a new name, it's almost as if he's able to move on from that past and not have it affect his life really anymore. Whereas for me, I'm never going to get away from that.
The majority of sex offenders who change their names do tell the authorities, but a worryingly high number are using it as a loophole to evade scrutiny. Phil Mackey, BBC News.
Now, it has been the centrepiece of coronations for more than 700 years, the medieval chair that kings and queens sit on as the crown is placed upon their head. Well, for the last 4 months, conservationists have been working to restore the chair ahead of the coronation of King Charles III at Westminster Abbey in May. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Just over 9 weeks to go now to the coronation, and Westminster Abbey is still busy with tourists. The physical preparation of the Abbey has barely begun. But in one of the Abbey's side chapels, one of the key components of the coronation is being made ready. This is the coronation chair, the 700-year-old chair made in the year 1300 and used at every coronation since then. The late Queen Elizabeth was seated on the coronation chair for her crowning in 1953, just as her namesake Elizabeth I had been 4 centuries before, and Henry VIII and others before that. The chair bears the marks of the centuries, graffiti from the 1800s when visitors were able to carve their initials into it, but conservators say all in all it's in remarkably sound condition.
It's made from oak and it's gilded. It would have originally have painted and gilded glasswork as well, so it would have looked like a metallic object. It's decorated with punchwork, which is small tiny dots that we use to create images. So there's birds, there's figures of saints and kings, and there's lots of foliage as well. And because so little survives of English art from that time, it really is an exquisite example of the quality of craftsmanship that doesn't survive anymore.
By Coronation Day, the chair's preparation will be complete. There'll be no attempt to restore its original gold leaf gilding. The significance of this chair is rooted in its age and the centuries of history that it embodies. There's one vital part of this historic chair which has still to be added. It's the stone of Scone, the ancient slab of sandstone on which Scottish kings used to be crowned, which on Coronation Day will rest just here, underneath the seat on which King Charles will be crowned. On Coronation Day itself, a stage, a platform will have been built in that area in front of the high altar. And the coronation chair will be there, the centre of attention, facing the high altar for the most solemn parts of the service, the crowning and the anointing. It will be the coronation of a British king, a religious service tailored in some respects to modern times, but honouring the centuries of tradition, represented by the chair which will be its centrepiece. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Westminster Abbey.
With just 11 minutes a day, walking just 11 minutes a day could stop 10% of early deaths, according to new research. The largest study of its kind found that if people met only half of the NHS's recommended 150 minutes walking a week, 1 in 10 premature deaths could be prevented. But currently most people don't meet that recommendation. Well, my colleague Sean Lay has been talking about that to one of the researchers on the study, Professor James Woodcock.
These are certainly very striking findings, Sean. Yeah, I mean, there may be bigger benefits than we might have expected, and I think we hadn't had the confidence before to say that so much benefit would come from what, for some people, will sound like a small amount of activity, while for other people it will still sound a bit more challenging.
I was talking to Mind representative earlier, who's head of physical activity there, and one of the things we were discussing was that it's not just the physical activity, which in itself must be good things because it's getting your heart pumping, it's getting the blood flowing, all the rest of it. It's actually the fact that in the process of walking, you kind of almost change your orientation to the world around you. And therefore, there's a mental effect.
I mean, that's very interesting. Yeah, we did look at in a separate study published last year on depression and mental health outcomes, and there is good evidence again of a dose-response relationship between physical activity and mental health outcomes, improved mental health. Now we can't be sure exactly what makes that up. Some of it probably does definitely come from the physical activity itself, but some of it may also come from the things people do along with their physical activities here. But we didn't just look at walking, we looked at all the different kinds of physical activity that people would be doing in this study. But walking is certainly probably the most common kind of physical activity where people are getting a lot of their benefits from. But, you know, active play, dancing, riding a bike, playing tennis, any of these things would count for the physical activity here.
Do you think there's a case for the NHS to perhaps revise its advice? I mean, if on the basis of the research you've done, because some people can say, well, look, 25 minutes a day, it's just a bit too much. I've got so much else on. I've got the kids, I've got the house to run, I've got a job and all the rest of it. And that, you know, the more you convince people that short, sharp can still make a difference, maybe more likely people are to take it up because it feels less invasive of their time to do other things.
Yeah, the way the messaging has been changing is that really what we're trying to say now is more is better. You know, do as much as you can. If you can, try and do a bit more. I mean, if you're already doing, 75 minutes a week, you will get extra benefits, and certainly things like weight loss, you're going to be wanting to try and do a bit more physical activity. If you're doing 150, maybe you can think about doing more than that. But if it seems too daunting, then even 75 minutes, you're going to be getting a lot of benefit. And I mean, it's however it works for you, trying to find a way to integrate it into your daily life. If you're busy with the kids, perhaps you've got a bit of time to play with the kids. If you can be taking, doing a trip to the shops or to work on bike or by foot, then these are all ways that may not take actually, more time out of people's busy days.
Hello there. It's been a chilly and quite cloudy start to the new month, the start of meteorological spring. Even seen more cloud across some western parts of the UK, normally sheltered from that northeasterly breeze. And that northeasterly breeze is bringing not just a lot of cloud, but a lot of showers today in England and Wales and eastern Scotland. But if we look into continental Europe, the air is clearer here. We've got clearer skies, and with an easterly breeze, we're going to see some of that clearer weather heading our way. So the cloud will be breaking across East Anglia, the southeast, later in the night across the Midlands as well. Where we do keep the cloud, there's still going to be some showers around, but I think we're going to find clearer skies arriving in northern Scotland. Temperatures here below freezing, and temperatures across East Anglia and the southeast by the end of the night won't be far away from freezing either, but there will be some sunshine on the way tomorrow. Now, there's still going to be some cloud around and still some showers as well, more especially across southeast Scotland, northeast England and perhaps into Northern Ireland. The cloud may increase in the afternoon across East Anglia, but across southern England, the Midlands, mid and south Wales, there should be much more sunshine than today, and we've got some sunshine across northern parts of Scotland as well after that chilly start. Temperatures are not really changing very much as we've seen over the past few days. We're going to be around 7 to 9 degrees. The winds will be lighter for tomorrow, and they'll stay light, I think, as we head into Friday. High pressure still sitting close by. We're going to be chasing cloud around. Slight change in the wind direction this time could mean more cloud coming back in across England and Wales, maybe bringing 1 or 2 light showers, and we've got more cloud for Northern Ireland. Probably a frosty start though Friday morning in Scotland, and that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine, although northern areas this time will see more cloud through the afternoon. And again, those temperatures at the moment still around 7 to 9 degrees. A bit chilly, as I say, for this time of the year. Now, we're going to find over the weekend the centre of the high drifting or retreating back towards Iceland, allowing that weather front to push southwards, bringing with it some thicker cloud. Saturday may well be dry, but rather cloudy. And we're going to find on Sunday the cloud is going to be thicker, more chance of seeing some showers. And temperatures are going to be a bit lower on Sunday as well. But there's colder weather to come as we head into next week, and that's because we're going to find a northerly wind picking up, bringing colder air from the Arctic. There's even the chance of some snow next week. At this stage, uncertain how much snow there's going to be or where exactly it's going to fall.